The girl lay face down in the dirt, her small frame trembling against the heat that bled off the earth. Jacob Morrow reined his horse hard, boots hitting the ground before the animal stopped moving. The sun pressed down like a branding iron, and the air was dry enough to burn the lungs. Her breathing came in quick, rag pulls, so shallow it seemed each one might be the last. He crouched, sliding an arm beneath her. Her skin was hot, dry, weighed almost nothing. Dust clung to her lips, cracked and peeling. Flies hummed close, bold in the still air. "Easy now," he muttered, voice barely above the hiss of the wind. The girl stirred but didn't speak. Her lashes fluttered, eyes rolled half shut. The creek was too far. She wouldn't make it. Jacob swung her up into the saddle, mounted behind her, and turned the horse toward the ranch at a hard trot. The leather creaked under them. Hooves drummed against the baked ground, sending small clouds of dust curling into the heat. By the time they reached the cabin, sweat ran down Jacob's back, and the girl's head had slumped to his chest. He eased her down inside, lowering her onto the single bed. Her hands twitched weakly against the blanket, and her lips moved without sound. On the small iron stove, his last pot of soup waited, rich with the smell of beef and potatoes, steam curling like a promise. He didn't think twice. He ladled it into a tin bowl, brought it to her, and slid a hand behind her neck to lift her head. Her eyes flickered open, dark, sharp for an instant, before softening again. The first sip hit her lips, and she drank greedily, small coughs breaking between swallows. He let her take as much as she could before the spoon rattled against the bowl. Empty. She fell back, eyes closing. Her chest rose and fell, slower now, steadier. The faintest trace of life had returned to her cheeks. Jacob set the bowl aside. That's when she whispered it. A single breath, barely a word. Black vultures. The name carried something with it. A shadow, a weight that seemed to fill the small room. Jacob's jaw set. He'd heard it before. The wind rattled the loose shutter, and outside, the light had taken on that late afternoon edge, golden but heavy, as if the sun were holding still. Jacob moved to the doorway, scanning the open range. On the ridge beyond the corral, a lone rider sat astride a black horse, the sun behind him making nothing but a dark shape against the sky. The figure didn't move, didn't wave, just sat watching. Jacob's hand rested on the doorframe, thumb tapping once, twice, like counting a beat. The rider turned his horse without hurry, slipping out of sight over the far slope. Behind him, the girl shifted in the bed, mumbling in a tongue Jacob didn't know. He glanced back, saw her clutch the blanket close, eyes darting beneath her lids. The smell of the soup still hung in the air, mixing with the dry scent of dust and sun-baked wood. It should have been a quiet moment, the kind that ends a day. But the silence felt wrong, too thick, as if the desert itself were holding its breath. Jacob pulled the shutter closed and dropped the bar into place. The boards groaned under his boots as he crossed back to the bed. She was sleeping again, but not peaceful. Her fingers twitched, her lips pulled tight. Outside, far off, a coyote yipped once, sharp in the stillness. Then nothing. Jacob sat in the chair by the stove, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. The empty bowl sat at his feet. A few streaks of broth dried on the tin. His eyes stayed on it for a long time, as if trying to read something in the shape of the stain. From the ridge, the rider had seen her, and if the rider was who he thought. Jacob's boot tapped the floor once, twice, the same slow rhythm as before. The girl shifted again, murmuring. This time he caught the word clear. Papa. Jacob looked at her, then at the door, then back to the bowl. The wind outside had picked up, brushing along the walls with a low, restless sound. The light was falling faster now, shadows pooling in the corners. He stood and reached for the lantern, setting it on the table but not yet lighting it. He kept looking toward the door. Do you want to go straight into Section 2 with the same tense, immersive style so it flows without a break? The horse snorted, restless under the weight of the stairs. Jacob held Nate steady on the saddle as they moved to the main street, eyes following them from behind curtained windows and the gaps of half-open doors. The boards of the doctor's porch groaned under his boots as he lifted her down. Her feet barely touched the wood before the door swung open. Dr. Willis squinted into the light, wiping his hands on a stained cloth. "She's Apache," the man said, voice flat, as if that fact carried more weight than her limp body. "She's hurt," Jacob answered, "and thirsty." Willis stepped aside without another word. Inside, the air smelled of camphor and blood. Jacob laid her on the cot, watching her eyes flicker as the doctor pressed cool cloths to her skin. From outside, the sound of low voices carried. Men gathered on the porch next door, speaking in that too casual tone meant for others to overhear. Troubles following him in, "Ain't right, bringing that here." A boot scraped hard against the plank. Jacob's jaw tightened. Sheriff Harlan appeared in the doorway, hat low, shadow cutting across the room. "Jacob," he said slowly, "I reckon you know who's been sniffing around the edges lately." "I know." "Then you know they don't let go of what they claim. You feed a vulture's prey, you'll draw the whole flock." Jacob didn't look away from the girl. "Maybe that's so." Harlan shifted his weight. "Town can't take that kind of heat." Jacob said nothing. The sheriff's boots clicked away. The murmurs outside faded into the wind. Later, at the general store, Jacob stepped in for bandages and coffee. The bell above the door gave a sharp jangle. A drunken old prospector at the counter blinked, squinting hard. His cracked lips pulled into something between a grin and a grimace. "Ain't you?" Jacob's eyes cut to him, cold and steady. The words died in the old man's throat. He took his bottle and shuffled out. The store fell quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock. Jacob paid in silence, the shopkeeper sliding the coins into the till without meeting his gaze. That night in the saloon, smoke curled thick under the low ceiling. Cards slapped against the felt. Jacob sat alone at a small table in the corner, hat brim low, watching the room through the haze. Two men played a slow hand nearby. He tracked every twitch of their fingers, every shift of an eye, as if the rhythm of the game mattered more than the whiskey in his glass. Through the open window came the sound of horses, distant but many, hoofbeats on hard ground, steady, unhurried. The noise rolled past the saloon like thunder behind the hills. By the time Jacob returned to the ranch, the girl was asleep. He poured water into a basin, set it by the bed, and pulled the blanket higher around her shoulders. She murmured in Apache, fingers knotting in the quilt. Outside on the far ridges, faint glows pulse in the dark, campfires, too many for travelers. Jacob leaned on the window frame, eyes fixed on those lights. The wind had gone still, holding the smell of smoke in the air. Somewhere out there, the black vultures were waiting. The lantern flame on the table quivered, a thin shadow of its own making dancing up the wall. Jacob's hand rested on the back of the chair, still as stone. The storyteller's voice rose in silence. And so the desert went quiet, the kind of quiet a man feels in his bones, right before lead starts flying. "Do you want me to move directly into Section 3, where the first attack hits before dawn?" Flames licked at the darkness, painting the barn walls in gold and black. Jacob burst from the cabin, rifle in hand, boots hitting the hard-packed dirt as the wind carried the crackle of fire. One steer lay in the dust, kicking weakly, a red bloom spreading across its hide. Hoofbeats circled the yard, shapes moving fast at the edge of the light. Laughter cut through the smoke, sharp and mean. A shot rang out. The tin water pail beside Jacob jumped, spilling its contents into the dust. He didn't flinch, just swung the rifle up, sighting on the shadow closest to the burning barn. The man wheeled his horse away, shouting for the others. The gang fanned out, black scarves over their faces, the glint of steel in their hands. One of them rode slow toward the porch, and the firelight caught his grin. "Hand her over, old man," he called. Jacob's voice was flat. "Ain't gonna happen." From the shadows behind him, another rider laughed, a low, ugly sound. "You hear that, Crow?" The man on the porch steps, tall, all angles, eyes like burnt coals, swung his leg over the saddle and stepped down. The light caught the silver buckle at his waist. "Jacob Morrow," he said, tasting the name. "Or should I say, Gideon Cole?" The laughter from the men turned darker, edged with recognition. Crow Holt stepped closer, boots stirring the dust. "Thought you were dead. Heard you buried your guns. took to herding cows. He spat in the dirt. Guess even a ghost could be foolish enough to wander back into the living. Jacob didn't move, didn't speak. The fire behind him roared higher, embers drifting into the night like fireflies. "You know how this works," Crow said. "The girl's ours. You got until sundown tomorrow to bring her to the canyon. You don't." He tilted his head toward the barn, the flames reflecting in his eyes. "This is just the start." The gang pulled back, horses stamping, tails whipping. Crow lingered a beat longer, gaze fixed on Jacob, as if trying to read something in his face. Then he swung back into the saddle, and they rode off into the dark, their laughter fading with the hoofbeats. Jacob lowered the rifle, turning toward the barn. The heat hit like a wall, and the roof sagged, ready to fall. He let it burn. Inside the cabin, Nate sat up in the bed, eyes wide, blanket clutched to her chest. The flicker of the fire danced across her face. "They're not coming back," she said, voice trembling more from certainty than fear. "They will," Jacob answered. He crossed to the table, setting the rifle down. His hand rested on it for a moment before moving away. The chair creaked under his weight as he sat, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. Through the open door, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of sage over the smoke. Somewhere far off, a coyote called again, short, sharp, then gone. Nature's eyes stayed on him, searching, as if she already knew there was more in him than the quiet man the town thought they saw. The wind rattled the walls once, then fell still. Do you want to continue with section 4 where Jacob finally opens a chest and prepares for the last draw? The spade bit deep, the sound of metal, on hard earth sharp in the cold morning stillness. Jacob's breath came slow, measured. Dust rose in thin clouds as he pried the wooden box free from the packed soil beneath the cabin floor. The metal hinges were rusted, but the lid lifted smooth, as if it had been waiting. Inside lay 2 revolvers, their blued steel worn soft by years of use. Beneath them, a folded piece of paper, edges frayed, ink faded. He didn't open it. His fingers rested there a moment before closing the lid halfway, the weight of it lingering in the air. When he turned, Nate stood in the doorway, blanket draped over her shoulders. Her eyes went to the guns, then to him. "They come tonight," he said. She nodded once, not asking how he knew. He set the guns on the table, the light catching faint scratches in the grips. With careful movements, he loaded each cylinder, the metallic click echoing through the quiet room. By sundown, the wind had shifted, carrying the dry taste of dust across the range. From the ridge, shapes formed, riders against the bleeding sky. The black vultures came slow, spread wide, their silhouettes long in the dying light. Jacob stepped into the yard, coat hanging loose, hands empty at his sides. Nate stood in the shadow of the porch, her small frame still. Crow, Holt reined in a dozen paces away, the rest of the gang fanning out behind him. "Last chance, Cole," he called, voice cutting clean through the air. Jacob said nothing. Crow smiled, slow and thin. "Then let's finish this." The first gun flashed. Jacob moved before the sound reached him. Coat flaring, hands finding the Colts with the ease of breath. The first man dropped from his saddle, a second before he hit the ground. Dust rose thick, the air torn by gunfire. Jacob's boots shifted with the rhythm of each shot, every step measured, each pull the trigger clean. The gang broke in 2, some rushing forward, others wheeling back. But the yard became a narrow place, the shadows swallowing them one by one. Crow charged through the smoke, revolver in hand. The 2 men faced each other across the yard, firelight from the burning barn casting long, jagged shadows. "Always knew you'd die with a gun in your hand," Crow said. Jacob's reply was a single shot. Crow staggered, eyes wide, and fell without a sound. Silence bled back into the night, broken only by the last hoofbeats retreating toward the dark hills. The wind carried the smell of gunpowder and charred wood, the barn collapsing on itself. Jacob stood still until the echo of the last shot was gone. Then he turned toward the porch. Nature's eyes met his, something unspoken passing between them. From somewhere far off, the storyteller's voice rose again, low, steady, carrying the weight of memory. Asterisk. And some say that night, The desert wind carried two names, one a girl who lived and one a man who once tried to lay his guns down, but found the West had other plans. Asterisk,